It's been said that for comedy to really be good, it's got to have a lot of truth in it. And for me, one of the most enjoyable and most difficult things about filming Chet was how much it rang true. And maybe you could connect with it on some level. Maybe you and your relationship have the same old argument pattern that comes around again and again. Maybe you have a client or a friend that you would like to explain some relationship dynamics to. Maybe you have a very solid connection with your partner and you want to figure out how to keep it that way. Or maybe you just enjoyed watching the video and you're curious about what it means. In any case, there are 3 important questions I'd like to answer in this video. Number 1, what does Chet represent in real life? Number 2, how does it impact your relationships? And 3, how can you get rid of a negative pattern like Chet? I'm also going to recommend some resources at the end of this video to really help you get a handle on this, because my goal is to help couples be able to more easily express their love to one another and to remove the barriers for doing so. Now, to understand what Chet represents in real life, we need to review a little bit about how the brain works. And for our purposes, we're going to talk about 2 parts of the brain. First of all, up here on top you have the cortex. It's what allows you to understand complexity, to solve complicated problems, to think ahead, to use language, to see the big picture. It's really what sets us apart from other mammals, especially out towards the edge, the neocortex. Let's call this, for our purposes, the rational brain. Now underneath, we have the limbic system. And one of its jobs is to pay attention to the environment, to keep tabs on what's going on, and to help our body adjust. So we'll call that part the emotional brain, because that's what our emotions do. They help us to respond accurately to our environment. For instance, if you lose something precious, then the emotional brain sets off the process of grieving and sadness. If you encounter something dangerous, it sets off the reaction of fear to keep you safe. And if something is invading your boundaries, either emotional or physical, it sets off anger to protect your space. 3 important points about the emotional brain. First of all, when it senses a threat, it shifts your body into fight, flight, or freeze, which is your defense mode. This prepares you to either fight for your life, run for your life, or shut down and play dead. Imagine cornering an animal. Chances are it's either going to cower and flee, it's going to turn and fight with everything it's got, or it's going to just completely faint and play dead like a possum. That's exactly what goes on in your brain when you're confronted with a threat. Second point, the emotional brain is extremely fast. It's not as complicated as the big, slow cortex upstairs. It's simple and it's quick, and its job is to keep you alive. So its processing speed is much faster. And sometimes it's already responded even before your cortex is aware of what's going on. Third point, the emotional brain is extremely strong. Its job is to keep you alive in a threatening situation. So it's not going to sit around and wait for the cortex to evaluate the situation and to take into account what everybody's feeling, what the best thing to do might be. No, its job is to say, hey, forget about your mamby-pamby rational thinking. It's time to run, or it's time to fight, or it's time to completely give up and shut down. So what does this have to do with Chet? Well, think about it. When you love someone, when you really love them, they have access to your heart like nobody else does. They have the ability to make you feel accepted and loved, put you on cloud 9. They also have the ability to mortally wound you. Now, your emotional brain knows this. And when it feels like you're being threatened in this very, very tender area here, it'll take over and say, I'll protect you. I'll put you into fight, flight, or freeze. Think back to when Sheila confronts Gary about the dishes. What happens? Instead of responding in this open, connected, hey, we're in this together kind of way, his emotional brain takes over and throws him into defense mode. Because he could have said, hey, I totally forgot the dishes again. I keep promising to do them and then I forget. You know, the dishes have never been important to me, so it's hard for me to remember them. but I know they're important. They're important to you, and yes, we have a cockroach problem. What can we figure out here? But what's happened, he's already been shifted into defense mode. Maybe Sheila's tone gave him this sense of, oh, I remember a time I was belittled. My mom talked to me in that way. Or maybe someone in a past relationship talked to me in that way. Or maybe he just keeps very high expectations for himself, and forgetting the dishes really brings it home to him. Maybe he's got nagging doubts that he's good enough for her in the first place, and it sets that place off. Whatever it is, his emotional brain has registered a threat at that point, sent him into fight, flight, or freeze. He's not going to be very capable of navigating a complex situation or feeling empathy for her situation. He's only in defense mode. And what was his response? Lay off, get off my back. That's an indication of the flight response. He's trying to get away from the problem. Now, Sheila's reaction looks different, but it's the same thing going on in her brain. She's already annoyed about the dishes. And then Gary's defensive response, where he moves away from her, sets her into fight, flight, or freeze. Now, for her, it's more of a fight response. She takes a dig on him. She goes for where it'll hurt him, implying he's not a responsible person. And at that point, the emotional safety is gone, and each of them begin to escalate the argument because their emotional brains have taken over. Now, for both Sheila and Gary, their brains are reacting to that loss of emotional safety. It's like they're saying, you're usually my safe place, where I'm accepted, where I'm understood, where I'm respected, where I'm appreciated, where I'm valued. But right now, you're attacking me. Right now, you're distancing yourself from me. Notice something interesting here. Gary's withdrawing response makes Sheila's angry pursuing response even worse. And Sheila's angry pursuing response makes Gary's distancing and withdrawing even worse. It's a pattern. It reinforces itself over and over and over, and it becomes the same old argument. No matter what starts it, that emotional brain response steps into a pattern that repeats itself and reinforces itself. And that is what Chet represents. The pattern, the cycle, the thing that gets going and takes over from you, takes away the emotional safety, takes away the sense of connection, throws you into fight, flight, or freeze, and ends up being a vortex that you can't escape, something that has no winners, just injury and frustration. Now, the first time a negative cycle jumps in and takes over for a couple, they're usually pretty surprised. They find themselves thinking, wait, if they love me, why are they calling me names? If they love me, why are they being so distant? If they love me, why are they nagging me? Why are they bringing up old hurts? It's really confusing, and they begin to look at their partner with a little bit more caution. They love me, but boy, they can hurt me. Maybe at that point they start putting up a little bit of a wall. Maybe they start leaving a little bit more distance between them for safety's sake. That can begin raising the level of tension, just making it that much easier for Chet to come in again. Eventually, it can feel like you're walking in a minefield. Like at any point, it could blow up. Chet could show up, take over. Home just begins feeling a little less safe, a little less relaxed. Now, for many couples, it stays at this level. We learn to avoid certain topics, we find other ways to connect, and it's okay. It works. For some couples, it begins to escalate. The cycle gets worse, the pattern grows, and especially when life gets stressful, when life throws things at you that you can't quite manage on your own. Just when you need each other the most, Chet drives a wedge between you, this pattern takes over, and that's when real damage occurs. So in order to have a healthy relationship, to have the security of long-term connection, you must begin to identify this pattern, this cycle between you, and get it out of your relationship. How do you do that? How do you remain safely connected with one another, even when you're frustrated, even about sensitive topics? You have to identify your pattern. What is your cycle and how does it work? You know the triggers probably. Finances, sex, in-laws, parenting, those are the issues, the topics. But get more specific. What is it that your partner does that sets off your emotional brain? When do you feel that flood? Is it an eye roll? Is it a tone of voice? Is it a word or a phrase? Is it something that they do? Is it a look that they have? Get to know what specifically sets off your emotional brain. And then, what do you do in response when your brain has shifted into defense mode? Do you pursue by nagging and attacking and name-calling? Do you bring up past injuries trying to prove your point? Do you pick a fight in order to get a response? Or do you withdraw by trying to change the subject, by physically leaving the room to avoid a fight? What about my personal favorite, getting very cognitive and analytical, trying to contain the crazy and explain it, but abandoning them emotionally? Or do you just pop in anger to get some space and not say something you really regret? Or maybe you go into the freeze mode, you numb out, shut down, everything shuts off. What does defense mode look like for you in those situations? Next, identify the thoughts that start coming at those times. Our brains, when they go into defense mode, are programmed to look for the worst case scenario. So what are your worst case scenario thoughts that begin to happen when the cycle is up and running? Remember what Chet said to our couple. He said things like, she doesn't care about what you do for her, it'll never be enough. He doesn't care about what's really important to you. You'll never be good enough for her. These are the kinds of thoughts that start coming, the worst case scenario thoughts. Finally, and maybe most importantly, begin to identify the emotions. Now, the surface emotions will be pretty easy to name. It's usually frustration, anger, annoyance. These are the emotions that your partner sees. Slow down just a little bit and see if you can begin to identify the emotions underneath, the more vulnerable emotions, the ones your partner doesn't see. Sometimes these are sadness, or hurt, or fear. Now, some of us might not even recognize that those emotions are there. But after working with couples over and over again, I can guarantee you that if you love each other, those vulnerable emotions are there, even if you're not aware of what they are yet. Then, as you get to know your cycle, you must begin to talk about it together during a calm time. Acknowledge to one another that when you get into fight mode, you do things and you say things that you wouldn't otherwise. And you get into flight mode, you act in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. You act in ways that aren't caring. You act in ways that are distant. You act in ways that are mean. Begin to acknowledge that we all have these tender spots inside that can get hurt. And if you can begin to talk about this, you can begin to develop an understanding. And something else, while you're having these conversations, begin to practice noticing that each conversation goes on at two levels. One level is what we're talking about. We're trying to develop an understanding. We're trying to figure out our cycle. Or it could be we're trying to figure out who's going to drop the kids off for soccer. Or it could be we're trying to talk about our finances. And the other level is the emotions. While you're talking about your cycle, if you feel your emotional brain starting to kick you up into defense mode, slow down. Talk about that. Say, I'm about to go there and I don't want to. Slow it down. Stay connected. See if you can do this. You must get a handle on the way your emotional brain will trigger you, trigger one another. You must get this out of your relationship. You must get rid of Chet. And then after you've run him off, after you've gotten a handle on this cycle, then you can begin to talk about healing injuries together. You can talk about forgiving one another. You can talk about really moving on, really letting the past be the past, because you have this new growing understanding, this new deepening connection with one another. Then you can feel like a team, like you can lean on one another during stressful times. You can really feel like this person's got your back in a whole different way. Now, if you want to follow up with this and get some more information, a little bit more in depth, I have 4 options for you. First of all, on my website, there is a worksheet that you can download that just helps you line out the pieces of the cycle that I was talking about. Your thoughts, your behaviors, your emotions. It just helps you sort through a little bit. You can download that for free. Secondly, also on my website, there's an article that I wrote to try to lay out all of these pieces and help you see how this cycle fits into a little bit of the bigger picture of a healthy relationship. It's called The Roadmap, and you can also download that for free. Thirdly, I'm going to give you a name you need to know, Dr. Susan Johnson. Dr. Johnson has pioneered the research that undergirds everything that I've been talking about today in the Chet video, in the therapy that I do. Everything began 25 years ago with Susan Johnson making some connections, beginning some research, connecting attachment theory to adult love relationships. And she lines it all out in her first book, Hold Me Tight. I recommend this for any couple who wants to develop a deeper, secure connection with one another. She also wrote Love Sense, which follows up to this, and Creative for Connection, which takes all the science and all the understanding and the research from this book and brings in a Christian component. So do yourself a favor and get to know some of Susan Johnson's work. Fourth, you can connect with a therapist who is trained in emotionally focused couples therapy, or EFT for short. This is the approach that's developed from 25 years of research in attachment theory, neuroscience, and continues with outcome research, process research, really trying to figure out what is the best possible way of understanding relationships and the best possible way of serving couples who are in crisis. It's literally changing how couples counseling is being done all around the world, and I'm convinced it's going to be the standard of care for relationship counseling in the next 20 years. Go to this website, iceeft.com, and click on the Find a Therapist tab to find out who in your area is trained in EFT. I'll tell you from personal experience, this training is not easy, it's not cheap, and the only therapists who are going to invest in that kind of a training are ones who really care about giving you the best service. So, thank you for your attention. I hope this is helpful in your journey. Tell your friends, spread the word. Chet is real, and you can be free.